There you go. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the desert of the real and AB Live. Welcome to Mithra's abode and this Black Iron prison in this Philip K. Dick world. Glad to have you, and I hope you've enjoyed my new little intro video. I think our guest might have recognized the music, and our guest is Chris Knowles. How you doing, Chris? Do you recognize the music?
Is it from Gladiator?
No, it's Bear McCartry from Battlestar Galactica, the TV show.
Oh, yeah. I only watched the original miniseries, so I wasn't too big a fan of the ongoing series. So
Okay, okay. Well, it's a
those are
good.
great credits, though. I'm really impressed. Did you do those?
Yes, yes. I just went online. I grabbed all these video clips and I just threw them together. So
Where are they from? They're amazing. Looks great.
I got them from I use a video recorder or software called Filmora, and they have stock like intro clips and all this stuff. And I just
Shh. You're not supposed to give away your secrets. They're
you.
great, though. And it looks very impressive, very professional. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And Chris, glad to have you on as always.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here.
And with us too, we've got the Moondog Vance. God, I'm the only one here without a nickname. Hello, Vance.
Hey, good evening, and glad to be here. Glad to see everybody in the chat. Glad to see you, Chris. And here we go.
Indeed, yes. Somebody's just said in the chat, Bear McCreary, Battlestar Galactica. They got it. Yes, and the chat is filling up. So if you have any questions for Chris, please type them in all caps, lots of question marks, and either Vance or I will get to. And tonight we are talking about Chris's new book, The Endless American Midnight, which I read, and that's all I can say. Woof. If you want to know why we're in 2020 and what's going to happen in 2021, you might want to read this book because it gives a lot of context to the shit show we are finding ourselves in. And we can consider this a sort of end of the year special as the apocalypse continues in a few days. So why don't we start with Chris? Tell us about the book and how it came about.
Well, I've been working on it for a number of years. People have always asked me to do a book and collect all these sort of random things. Of course, I have like thousands of posts over, the past 14 years to choose from. So it was a rather daunting kind of task. And I could never really figure out an angle for it. But, 2020 made my decisions for me. It's interesting because I put it together in a very dark state of mind. I started really doing the final whittling away in this late summer, early fall, and you kind of, I'm sure you can remember how dark those times were. Yeah. And I excised a lot of material that was very rousing and optimistic, in a sort of like let's fight to the death kind of way. And I actually put that material back into the ebook because I felt that with the passage of time I started feeling a little bit more up, the gaslighting wasn't quite so intense as it had been over the summer. So I just felt like I was finding my feet again. And the ebook sort of reflects that. It's, all the material that I put into the ebook, which is, 60 to 100 pages, depending on what format you're looking at it in, was all material that I had excised from the final cut of the book. And the reason being is that, that was a very dark time. And, I wanted something to reflect that. I wanted there to be sort of a thematic consistency, like a tone set through it. But really what happened is, so as I was looking at all these things that I had written over the years, and it was amazing to me how many pieces that I had written over the years that were just, this is how this is going to happen. This is going to play out. And it's not because I was a psychic or some kind of seer or something. It's just that you just saw these things in motion, and getting to this point that we are now and that we've been in since 2016, I think, it's not an accident. It's been like a slow motion train wreck. You know, you just see this train going very, very slowly down the track over the past 4 years. And you know, it really started, I think, with the financial crash in late 2007, and that's, interestingly enough, that's when I really started blogging in earnest. So looking at a lot of things that were going on over the summer, seeing this weird religion, you know, this weird woke religion sort of spring up, this weird, what I call Puritanism without grace, spring up all over the country, all over the world, really. And seeing that everything that we're seeing now, and we've been seeing for the past at least the decade, maybe the decade and a half, to me has been an inevitable result of disenchantment. You know, I think that we've been disenchanted, and in a bad way. You know, sometimes, you know, I always say that like disillusionment can be a good thing, because, you know, illusions can lead you astray. You know, they can lead you into disaster. But the whole idea of disenchantment, when you just sort of whittle yourself down to a materialistic point of view, what we're seeing now is the inevitable result. And, you know, it's what I call the dark midnight of the soul. And I feel like as a culture and as a society, neither of which I think you can label America as today. I think America is just another empire. But as a culture and as a society, such as they are, we've been despiritualized, we've been disenchanted, we've been overly focused on superficiality and materialism. And I think in a lot of ways, what we've been seeing, you know, is certainly a lot of it is intelligence agencies and billionaires, you know, playing chess with one another. But I think it's also the fact that it was so successful this year is a you know, inevitable outcome of this process of disenchantment and despiritualization. I think we're as a people, I think we've just surrendered our spiritual awareness, you know, for one reason or another. And I think the results have been disastrous. And that's really what I wanted when I sort of set about assembling the book. That's really what I wanted to address. And I said, you know, up front, this is not going to be an easy book to read. This is a very challenging book. But, you know, I mean, even in the print version, I ended on, you know, I think very positive and optimistic note.
Yeah, I agree. Again, for the audience, it's evergreen, but you really start seeing everything pointing to this year. I mean, even sections where you're talking about Ferguson and the Obama years, it's almost there's a parallel to today, except now it's more, again, intense. There's more weapons used against us. And when do you think we stop being a republic, or when did we start being a country and an empire? Is it as simple as the Woodrow Wilson era with World War One and the Fed and income tax, or what are your thoughts on it?
I think that was, you know, it's been this like slow motion process. I think that period that you're talking about during the Woodrow Wilson administration and Bretton Woods and all these kind of things definitely played a big part in it. But I think that the process really accelerated with the first Bush administration and the Gulf War. You know, that post Iran-Contra period, where I think there was a tremendous amount of disillusionment among a lot of people, and that's when you started seeing the rise of the militia groups and various apocalyptic cults. Was really during that period, was really during that late 80s, early 90s period when things really started to accelerate. And throughout the 90s, you know, the Clinton era was seen as being this very happy-go-lucky kind of good old days period. But at the same time, everybody was, you know, enjoying their stock dividends and so on. They were putting into place all sorts of very scary and dangerous limitations on our civil liberties and our civil rights, you know, like these terrorism acts and so on. And I think, really the last nail in the coffin was 9/11. You know,
Yeah,
and from there, it's just, from there we've been just living in this fugue state. We've been living in this twilight. What I call the dark midnight of the soul. I think we've been kind of stuck in that since 9/11. And I think what we're seeing now is we're just seeing, the inevitable degradation from being basically prisoners in our own country.
yeah, I think I can't argue with that. I do like, for example, and as I mentioned to you, I'm very happy you included the article on Van Halen, because as you write, he and that group symbolized an era, not just California, but America, an era that Vance, you and I experience. And it's an era that, or a feeling this country will never get again, don't you think? I mean, it's symbolic.
Are you asking me,
Yeah, yeah.
or Vance?
Van. Well, I don't know if Vance was a Van Halen, but he did live in that America.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
it's really interesting because I've always been a big fan of Van Halen, and the arc of that group is really revealing to me in a lot of ways. Because they start off in the late '70s, and they start off in that kind of like Helmut Newton, Eyes of Laura Mars, Studio 54. I mean, just this kind of very strange period in American history, that's where this darkness is kind of emanating from New York. The blackouts and Son of Sam and all this kind of stuff. Later on we had Cropsey. So they sort of were an antidote to the 1970s. They were an antidote to the collapse of the '70s hard rock bands. Were really kind of starting to fall apart or sort of reach this impasse or midlife crisis. And they just came out and they were just like, shot like from a cannon. And they were very charismatic, incredibly talented. And, what I say in the book is that, like, they threw a party that everyone was invited to, and they were telling jokes that everyone, was in on. It was very much a very open and welcoming kind of vibe, even though, certainly a lot of people weren't going to be into the hard rock, but and then it just follows this inevitable arc. They get into the drugs, and the egos take over, and then David Lee Roth is kicked out of the group, and they get Sammy Hagar, and they just sort of become like this very generic corporate rock and roll band. And, things just proceed from there. I mean, Dave, every year just seems to get crazier and crazier. And Eddie really descended into addiction and alcoholism. And he had the cancer and the hip replacement. It's, he was just like, it was really sad for people like us to kind of watch him fall apart. And again, it is like, it's emblematic. It's very much a metaphor for what's going on, I think, in the culture. That, but when they started, they were like this antidote to this very decadent and depressed vibe that the country was sort of locked in. And they, things proceed into the '80s, and things are just a big party by the middle of the decade. But it just starts to collapse, and I think the collapse that they experienced almost sort of parallels things that were going on in the larger culture. And they weren't alone. I mean, that section that you're referring to is called "All My Heroes Are Dead," and I talk about Bowie and Prince and Scott Weiland and Chris Cornell and Marty Balin of Jefferson Airplane, and just all these people who had passed away during the course of my blogging, and just really seemed to me like at the end of an era. They were marking, just signposts on the end of our culture. Because we don't have a culture. We don't have a culture, and we don't have a society. We have a number of mutually hostile microcultures. I mean, it really is a classical imperial state that we're locked into. And one thing that you and I discussed were on the Cosmic Keys is that I sort of likened this to Rome's crisis of the third century. And I think there are a lot of parallels. The crisis of the third century was eventually resolved by Aurelian, who sort of laid the groundwork for the rise of Constantine, really, even though he might not be recognized as such, but we'll see what happens. I mean, Rome was very much like we are. A collection of people from all over the world, all over the empire. No central culture, so to speak of. A very aloof and hostile aristocracy. Just a number of parallels. I mean, they're really staggering when you start to line them up. So how this is going to resolve, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think the solution which you talk about in your book, it has to be a spiritual solution, like you talk about. Wokeism, as we know, and the witch hunts and all that started with new atheism and atheism plus, and you basically record it, and it sort of was a springboard. But I want to quote part of your book because, again, I think it hits it on the head what we need to do. And please let me read this. It's called "The operating philosophy behind my work is that pop culture is always more resonant when it addresses spiritual issues or wields some variety of spiritual power. And the more interesting the particular spirituality in question, the more interesting the art. Hence, Jack Kirby is more interesting than Steve Ditko. Led Zeppelin is more interesting than Deep Purple. David Bowie is more interesting than Elton John. Philip K. Dick is more interesting than Isaac Asimov. And The X-Files is more interesting than Law and Order. And William Gibson is more interesting than all of his cyberpunk contemporaries. And I think that struck me because you are writing about the fall of popular culture, but also talking about how we really do need a spiritual solution to invigorate our culture.
Yeah, we do, and it's a very simple thing when you get down to it. Is that when you have an aggregate of people from different walks of life and just all different kind of persuasions and nationalities, there needs to be some sort of common binding purpose. And really what it gets down to is that everything that is materialistic or is tangible somehow falls apart. It eventually falls apart. We really had this, when you referred to when I was documenting how this whole thing was playing out with the rise, it started with the skeptics, and then that kind of segued into the new atheist movement, the new atheists that were sort of starting to make a lot of noise in the wake of the Gulf War. People like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. All these people were not the kind of people that you wanted to build anything on because they're all, deeply dysfunctional as individuals. That was going to be a non-starter. But there was this really coordinated assault on, not only organized religion, which is ongoing, with a lot of these governors sort of targeting, the churches and the synagogues in their shutdown. We're seeing a lot of this in New York, for instance, with the Orthodox communities. But not only is this the targeting of organized religion, but there's just this targeting of having any kind of spiritual consciousness whatsoever. I mean, you are not in the in-group. You're not in the group of the managerial class who have complete disdain for anything spiritual, unless they're being naughty and fooling around with some sort of black magic or Satanism. It's been coordinated. I think a lot of it was being funded by Jeffrey Epstein. It tied in with this whole science worship, this new scientism, and which we see to this day. This whole idea of like trust the science. Well, trust the science is kind of a non-starter when you look at the reality, and 70% of all scientific experiments can't be replicated. So that means 70% of science, and it's especially bad in medicine, is just fake. It's just false. It's just generated to pay salaries. So there was this multi-pronged, multi-layered assault with these groups, with the skeptics and the atheists and so on. And I think that one of the great tools that they wielded was shame and embarrassment. They made you feel ashamed and embarrassed to believe anything other than this very cold, rational, reductionist mindset. If you believed in astrology, if you believed in UFOs, if you believed in any kind of organized religion, certainly, they used shame and trolling. It was very effective, because you're seeing like a lot of this being wielded by just anonymous people on the internet, people who are just completely unaccountable. But what I think happened is that, and what I refer to in the book, and you've touched upon there, is that there was a counter movement within the atheist movement called Atheism Plus. And it was basically mostly women. Rebecca Watson was sort of at the forefront of this. And it was kind of a reaction to the fact that a lot of the leading lights of the skeptical and new scientist and atheist movements were really just scumbags. They were really borderline sexual predators, if not actual sexual predators. And that makes a lot of sense when you realize that, a lot of this is being funded by Jeffrey Epstein, right? So, the fish rots from the head, right? So it really poisoned the well, though. And I think, the wokeness, there's a number of different influences there, but I think a lot of it has to do with mental illness, with a generation of kids being over medicated, with being on medications that they really have no business being on, and would make whatever kind of anxiety or any kind of mental disruption infinitely worse, right? These just off-label use of medications or over medications, so on and so forth. I mean, we went through this with my son. I mean, the teachers were always trying to get him on Ritalin and all these kind of things. So, but the Atheist Plus movement, I think, was really really spurred the woke thing on, because there was a lot of overlap with like what they call Tumblr-easters, which were sort of mentally ill girls, teenage girls on Tumblr. And there were sort of all these overlaps with fandom and so on. But it created this perfect storm, ultimately. And I think a lot of it was just in reaction to just the incredible aggression of people who were in, movements like Gamergate, or within the skeptical community. I mean, there was a lot of overlap between all these groups as well. People on 4chan and so on. It really did poison the well. It just created an incredible amount of animosity. That when you start to see a lot of these things, these crazy things that these people say on Twitter and so on, you got to. It makes a little bit more sense. I mean, I think these people are all deeply ill, but it makes a little bit more sense when you realize the fact that it's just arising from this incredibly toxic and violent, in a sense, atmosphere that grew out of all these different movements that I've been talking about. And these movements were almost sort of discarded as we saw the rise of the Trump thing and Keck and so on in 2016. But I mean, this is what happens. I mean, violent actions, or hostile or aggressive, whatever you choose to call them. I mean, these actions create reactions, and it just creates this snowballing effect. And I think just a lot of the extremism and again, the extreme mental sickness that you see, particularly on Twitter. I think Twitter is really sort of the locus of this ever since Tumblr collapsed. But it didn't just arise out of a vacuum. It arose out of just this very toxic and sick period where all these groups were basically flaming and trolling each other on the internet.
Yeah, I think it's well said, and it's certainly culminating today. And on a side question, I have to ask you this as it's in your book, but could you tell me about the time you worked for the real Tony Soprano?
Yeah, I can tell that story now because he passed away recently.
You can come out of
for
witness
years,
protection program.
what's that?
You can come out of the witness protection program.
Yeah, right. So what had happened is that when The Sopranos got big, I just refused to watch it, and people were like, "Why wouldn't you watch it?" Because I said, I was in that environment. I used to basically work for that guy, and it was, those people are horrible people. I mean, they're all idiots, and I just didn't want to glorify that world that I sort of found myself, in the middle of. So what had happened is that I moved to New Jersey, and I needed a job. So I got a job at this restaurant. And it was basically a situation where it was a very popular bar, sort of a hangout place that became, they wanted to sort of upgrade and become, a fancier restaurant. And, I didn't really kind of realize, because the people I was dealing with were hired people, like, managers and so on, and the chef, I mean, I started as a waiter and then became a line cook. But what I came to find out and came to discover is that the guys who owned the place were involved in this whole society, let's say, the secret society, with a very specific pecking order, because this particular secret society, let's just call them, owned a number of restaurants in this town or the city. So it was a surreal experience, because this guy was I mean, I don't even know if he knew how to write. He literally looked like a gorilla. He started out as a boxer and then went into construction, and and then became a restaurateur. So it's like almost the classic arc there. But he would have these guys come in on Saturday nights, and they'd eat down in the banquet room, and you really thought that you walked onto the set of Goodfellas or something. It was surreal. And I'd go down, because they'd want all these like big bowls of like boiled calamari and boiled scungili, which is snails and stuff. I mean, all this disgusting stuff. Like we'd boil like calamari, which you can't eat. Nobody wants to eat calamari unless it's deep fried, believe me. Right. And just bring this stuff down, and like be butter and olive oil on it, and it was just like, oh, I mean, it just like it was a cartoon. It was just like, and it's funny, because the guy who sort of initiated me into this whole thing, the guy who sort of told me what was going on, had to, he always had to wait on these guys, and he was terrified of them because he grew up in this town, and he knew, he knew a lot of these people, and knew like they were just really bad news. So yeah, I'm being intentionally vague, but it really was the real life Tony Soprano, and the great thing that happened. I can't believe this. If this happened today, it would be like all over Twitter and everything. But this guy comes in, the gorilla. Let's just call him the gorilla, and says, nobody in any senior positions can be anything but Italian. Like only Italians. Only the manager can only be Italian. The chef. I mean, the chef was already Italian, but like the head bartender and the floor manager, and like everything had to be, even the head waiter, like everybody had to be Italian. If you weren't Italian, you were basically downgraded, just completely illegal, right? So the person who becomes the manager was a waitress, and she was also a Coke dealer. She was dealing Coke out of the restaurant. So it was kind of cool because she'd always hook us up with
Yeah,
lines,
a
but
little
she was
energy.
also flamingly incompetent. So they hired all these people, because only Italians could be running this place, and they ran it into the ground. But I later found out that he was involved in like these sort of some of you people who are fans of Gordon White, will know, or Catherine Austin Fitz will know about HUD, and he was involved in sort of these these HUD scams and stuff, and it was an experience. It really was an experience because I had no idea. At first, I just thought, because my stepfather's Italian, and I sort of knew that world, but I didn't know that world. You know what I mean? That world was, and it wasn't until I was taken aside and said, these guys, so yeah, it was surreal, man. And like I said, I just could not watch the Sopranos for years afterwards because
Yeah, that's a
that whole world. I mean, those people are just idiots. They really are. I mean, the one thing when I eventually did watch the Sopranos, the thing that I appreciated. I mean, that's about the DeCavalcanti family up in a little bit north, but I appreciated how it just made all these. I thought it was incredibly accurate, to be honest with you. I mean, it was almost too familiar to me because it was just like, yeah, I know these guys. I know that world. I had sort of like I was always in the kitchen, you know what I mean, and this sort of had to be told to me, everything that was going on. But
yeah, but the Sopranos is very occult. I mean, it brings up Carlos Castaneda, Nietzsche, Taoism, Egyptian mythology.
What, the Sopranos?
Yeah. When you
Yeah,
watch
well, none of those guys, none of the
chases
real
into
guys were ever talking about any of that stuff. Believe me, I
That's
mean,
what I'm saying.
these are guys who could use "fuck" 3 times in a sentence. You know what I'm saying? I think that was half their vocabulary.
Okay, so they were like in the show, it's like, "Hey Tony, I'm reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu." That would never happen, or
No, never. At least not what I saw. No. So we just had a 10-minute conversation about like one stray line in the book. So.
Yeah, well, you're like, you did say, ask me sometime to talk about it. So
yeah,
the time came now, Chris.
Yeah, I'm being intentionally vague because there are, sensitivities at work. But really, that was all broken up. I mean, ironically, it was Rudy Giuliani who broke up all those families. I mean,
Oh, really?
families that were running New York and New Jersey. They were really pretty much shadows of their former selves by the late 80s. And a lot of it had to do with Rudy Giuliani.
Interesting. Yeah. And then, of course, Trump was always very connected to them, but that's another story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, all these, like you said, all these secret societies running around trying to run our country. Well, Vance, do you have a question or any question from the audience for Chris?
Well, here's one that caught my eye. Garden of Gale wants to know, is Fort Devens a gateway to hell? I hope you know what that means, because I don't.
Yeah, Fort Devens was a sort of a major part of my early childhood, because my mother was a professional musician and had a performance troupe that it was really interesting, because I sort of got exposed to the mob there because one of the places that she had a residency at was owned by the Irish mob.
Yes.
Which my mother was all too happy to tell me. I mean, she thought it was funny, I guess. But so, and this is where like I'm 3 or 4 years old and I'm playing with my little Hot Wheels on the floor of this place. That maybe there could have been some sort of shooting event. I don't know. But anyway, so Fort Devens. Yeah, so 2 of her partners, it was a husband and wife, lived right near Fort Devens. And boy, when you talk about like spooky, weird places. That part of Massachusetts is I'm not sure if that was ever specifically in Lovecraft. I mean, they also had a summer house in Gloucester, which is right in the heart of Lovecraft country, and that that's one of the things I talk about is sort of the unhappy results of that experience. But yeah, Fort Devens at the time. So at the time that I was spending a lot of time in that area, and interesting too, because the Shakers, which were a spin-off group from the Quakers, that was one of their headquarters. They had like a Shaker village in this area. But at the time, it was called the U.S. Army Intelligence School, and now they have they basically Fort Devens is where they have the real life Arkham Asylum. They have this hospital, federal prison hospital for the mentally ill. Like Joker Sarnaev was there, and
Joker.
yeah, I mean a lot of these people. So yeah, Devens was very weird place. And the other thing that I talked about back in 2017, and you can make of this what you will, but there was a kid named Orion Krause. I don't know if I've talked about him on your show before, Miguel, but he was a musician who came home from college and just got up one morning and beat his family to death with the baseball bat, and then stripped off all his clothes, rolled around in the mud, and went next door to the neighbor's house and said, "I just killed my family. I need my medicine." And yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing about this book is that when I went back, I was like, oh, okay. A lot of this material ended up in "He Will Live Up in the Sky." I didn't realize how much of it, how much of like autobiographical material ended up in that book until I went back and read a lot of these things. I was just like, oh, okay, yeah. But so there was this kid named Orion Krause, and this was not too long before the whole situation with Stephen Paddock in Las Vegas. And boy, I just I get a real bad feeling about it. I think that because of his proximity to Devens, and Devens now, besides being where the real life Arkham Asylum is located, they're also their main task now is basically militarizing all these federal agencies. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education. I mean, all these different agencies all have like armed wings now. They all have like their own armies. And
Jeez.
yeah, and a lot of this work is being done at Devens, which is like, oh. So yeah, so there's some other bad stuff that happened in my life that had a direct connection to Devens as well. And again, I mean, this is stuff that I have to be a little bit vague about, but some really bad stuff happened when I was in that area when I was young. That was connected to people at Devens and was connected to people involved in certain things. Let's say.
You think there are portals in certain places on the earth?
Well, it's funny you
Things-
should ask that because there's a stone chamber at the end of their street. The end of this family's street. And what was that guy's name? He's sort of the guy who claimed to be. He was a ufologist. Or was it Joe? I forget his name now. He's one of these people who sort of come and go. But there was this ufologist who claimed that he went to Harvard, and it turns out he didn't, and he was sort of disgraced. He was exposed by one of these skeptics and so on. But he had done some really interesting work talking about the stone chambers and how they were always like near a military base, and that there was always some sort of portal nearby. So there very well could have been. It fit the criteria in that regard. And like I said, I mean, this is a weird place. And again, I apologize. I'm gonna have to be very vague about this stuff, but there was some extremely bad stuff connected to all this more recently.
Yeah, you mentioned the Vegas shooter. That is still such a conundrum that seems to no breakthroughs or anything. I mean, I was thinking, well, he didn't leave any sort of evidence or manifesto, and it seems the recent Nashville bombing, that's another weird one, don't you think? I mean, again, no
Well,
manifesto, no nut. That's not what nut jobs usually do.
yeah,
Alleged nut jobs.
yeah. I've been pretty clear all along that I think Stephen Paddock was a patsy. I mean, this
Yeah.
elderly man who was in poor health, um, somehow could operate automatic weapons with bump stocks or whatever he was said to be doing. I just don't believe it. The whole situation stinks, and it's interesting how they sort of dropped him. Like they said, like the maid was never in his room, and he had like basically this giant arsenal. It's my belief that he was a gun runner, and he was in reason he was in Vegas a lot is that he was laundering the money, through gambling. Um, and I think that he was definitely a patsy. I mean, there's just so much hinky nonsense about that whole situation. I don't know how anybody else or anybody could think that he was anything else but a patsy. Particularly, he's shot by the cops. They burst in the door and shoot him in the head. I mean, just the whole story. Oh no, they said that he shot himself. I mean, oh, come on. And this is why like the gaslighting just keeps getting worse because it's getting harder and harder to disguise these things, to get people to go along with the official accounts of these kind of situations. When you talk about the Memphis thing, I mean,
Yeah, Memphis.
I'm sort of reading a lot of these Nashville. I'm sorry. I'm reading a lot of these strange stories that this has something to do with like the NSA, AT&T database there or something. When I saw the destruction that this so-called RV bomb, that he had a propane tank or two. There's no way. I mean, that something major ordnance was used in that area that caused that destruction. When he's blown up, and it's always these guys never live to tell the tale, right?
Never.
So, yeah, and then in my most recent post, I talked about all the Mithraic stuff. Like that AT&T's official symbol is Mithras. It's called the spirit of electricity. And I sort of tied that into the fact that I think that the reason why Mithraism started becoming so popular in the late 19th century was because of electricity. I think that there was some sort of connotation among these societies and so on that they saw the use of electricity and this kind of technology as being their ascension to godhood. And I mean, that's why you see Mithras in all these different guises in so many strange places like Rockefeller Center and the Statue of Liberty and different corporate logos and so on. So, the most recent one that I've seen as, connected to all this is like ExxonMobil, because ExxonMobil has Pegasus, right? That red Pegasus. So Pegasus is connected to Perseus, and Perseus is generally believed to be the secret identity of Mithras, that Mithras is this kind of Indo-Iranian god of light that was basically appropriated for this cult that was basically centered in eastern Turkey and northern Syria. So again, I mean, I saw a lot of these kind of symbolism. The alleged bomber was from Antioch, and the king, the kingly priest who was basically generally seen as the first Mithraist was a guy named Antiochus. I mean, just all these kind of these strange things, and it was just before sunrise, and sunrise on December 25th was this big feast period for Mithraists, and they discovered that there was this Mithraic temple in central England that was aligned somehow with the sunrise on the morning of December 25th. So yeah, I mean, it's all these rituals, it's all these rituals that I've been talking about for a number of years. And, the thing that I realize and the thing that I touch up on in the book, The Endless American Midnight, is that, they do these things because they work. For years I was just trying to, because since the very beginning of the blog, I was looking at all these rituals, particularly during the 2008 election. There was all this ritualism over Sirius, which, Joe Biden has kind of touched upon more recently with the dogs, Major, Canis Major, in the ankle, the ankle of Orion, and then Hunter, Orion the Hunter, all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's basically the same symbol system that we saw a lot of in 2008, where we had Obama and McCain kind of fighting over the glyph of Sirius, the Egyptian glyph of Sirius, and using elements of that in their campaign logos. So the thing that, so I was like, what? For years, I was just trying to figure out, like, why are they doing this stuff? Like, why are these performing these rituals? These, that some of them can get really obsessive. The use of symbolism can get very, very obsessive. And I was just like, why are they doing this? And, we'd see, like, I don't know, somebody like Vigilant Citizen who said, like, oh, this is like some mind control thing or whatever. And it's just like, well, that's not a very compelling explanation, And then people would have all these different theories about it. But the thing that I really started to land on was that they do these rituals because they work. They gain power from them, whatever power that is. Because we're talking about a bunch of people who are generally rather pragmatic, right? In their business dealings and so on, and often ruthless. This, what I call the false god of efficiency, that they seem to have this obsessive adoration of. And it really struck me that, like, they would not be performing these rituals if they didn't think they worked. I mean, these are just not the kind of people who seem frivolous to me. They perform these rituals because they work and they gain power from them. So what does that mean? What does that ultimately mean? Because at the same time, these people, even like somebody like a Jeffrey Epstein is performing all these rituals, they're brainwashing us and gaslighting us into, having no beliefs in anything but materialism whatsoever. So it's rather insidious, because we know for a fact that Jeffrey Epstein was funding all kinds of science groups and skeptic groups and atheism groups and transhuman groups and so on and so forth. And then you look at his solar adoration temples on his island, with a giant sundial and that solar temple with the gold dome, and on and on and on. It's the hypocrisy is rather stunning, I think. But he was a total scumbag, so we shouldn't be surprised. But even Ghislaine, when I talked about these weird alignments where she ended up in a place in New Hampshire that would put her in a straight line with, at the northern end would be the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, and then her place there. And no, I'm sorry. Then Aleister Crowley's vacation spot in 1916 when he stayed with Evangeline Adams in New Bristol, New Hampshire, and then her spot there. And then if you kept following that line down, you'd get to the part of Springfield, Massachusetts, where Jack Parsons' family lived just before he was born, just before they moved out to Los Angeles. And the fact that she was, arrested on World UFO Day, and her connections to Jack Parsons through her sister being married to the son of Ed Molina, who started the Jet Propulsion Laboratory with Parsons. It just starts to get very, very strange, and you realize that these people aren't involved in all these things. We're not seeing these things pop up again and again in their lives by happenstance. They really do believe this stuff. And the reason that I can say that with great confidence is that I've been looking at this stuff for a very long time. I mean, since the 90s, in the expanded, in the PDF version, in the electronic version of the book, I include my first major synchromistic analysis, which was of the Clinton impeachment, which was just a giant Masonic, orgy. Really, it really was. I mean, it was just from start to finish, and the numbers and everything it was just a giant Hiram Abiff ritual. It really was. At least that's my belief. People will argue with that, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I always say, or I quote the saying, millionaires don't believe in astrology, billionaires believe in astrology. It works. It worked for the Nazis. And what you're talking about, it's so right. They want to increase their spiritual power while making us completely not believe in the stuff that we could use to liberate ourselves and to better our lives. I mean, it reminds me when Augustus Caesar came into power, he had like 10,000 magic books burned, not because he's evil, because he's smart. He knew if I'm going to start this empire, we need to keep things under control with the government. And, in those days, eventually, if you needed some magic, you had to go down to the Jew or the Samaritan or the Christian down the road to get some real meaty magic for whatever exorcism and so forth. So, the empire never ended. That's all I'm going to say. Vance, any question for the audience that you have?
Yeah, we got a couple here. Let's see, which one do I pick? Chris, you can answer what you see America being by 2030, or you could answer a more detailed question about Pegasus Plaza in Dallas off of JFK's death route. Or you can answer a question about the obelisks that we, the monoliths, actually.
Why don't we do all three?
Sure. Go for it.
Well, right. So America by 2030, I'm making a New Year's resolution not to make predictions anymore because I just think that things have gotten so strange that it's kind of a sucker's game to make predictions at this point because things are not following a logical course, in my estimation. Things are getting very weird, and it feels to me like reality is becoming very fungible and not unfixed, inconstant. So I would not want to try, to make those kind of predictions. And I think anybody who would is setting themselves up for failure, quite honestly. It kind of reminds me, I'm going to lapse into one of my patented X-Files metaphors. So we had the 10th season, the special season, what they call the event season. And at the end, I had written all these, I'd watched it all ends up with the bridge and the flying saucer and everything. And I'd written this whole big piece on it, arguing where the story was going to proceed because, there were all these, I used all these precedents and, went into canon and so on. And then, the next episode, it just turned out it was all a dream, like the old Dallas.
J.R. Dallas.
Nobody would have, nobody would have predicted that. So why did I even bother, right? I mean, it was just my mistake, and I told people, I said, my mistake was looking to canon to try and interpret this thing when Chris Carter just had no interest in canon whatsoever.
No.
So I would not venture to guess. I'm not terribly optimistic at this point in time, but that could change too. And then you asked me about Pegasus Plaza. Yeah.
Dallas.
So
speaking of Dallas.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing, and I think that
decode the symbology he wants you to.
Yes. So again, we're talking about Perseus. Now, Perseus to me is a really interesting figure, and I'm becoming more and more interested in him because this is the whole thing with Algol. All this kind of stuff and this kind of stuff. I mean, that's all Algol. That's what the Eye of Horus is, because that's what the Egyptians called the Eye of Horus, was the what became to be known as the demon star Algol, which is in Perseus, but it's in the head of Medusa. So I'm really interested in Perseus for the reason that, really what Perseus is that he is a hero semi-demigod who gained his powers through technology, essentially. He was gifted with magical tools and magical weapons by the gods, particularly by Hermes, to carry out the mission. So I think again, this whole idea of like, why is this symbolism important today? Like, why do these people glom onto this symbolism today? I think it's exactly that. I mean, I think that the importance of Perseus is that if you look in the night sky, he's killing the bull, which is Taurus, which lies on the ecliptic, the zodiac, and he's rising above that. He's rising up into heaven. He's rising up that, the tree of life or the stairway to heaven, whatever you want to call it, that band of the Milky Way that goes up to the celestial pole. So he's rising up to that, and he's rising up to that because of the technology that he was given by the gods. And I think the symbolism that we see, particularly with that quote unquote Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, when we see Mithras / Perseus rising out of the zodiac, what he's doing is he is transcending time. Mm-hmm. He's just, the horoscope, right, is the hours, the horos, right, the scope of the hours, which is time, which is the great destructor. It's the great slave driver. We're all enslaved by time, which eventually kills us. So what Perseus is doing is that he's transcending that. He is rising up into the northern pole of the night sky with Cepheus, and Cepheus is God. Cepheus is the gardener, but he's also, Cepheus is sort of in competition with Draco, which is Satan. Draco the dragon. And if it just becomes very simple and very clear if you look at a star map. So that, I think, when I realized that Mithras was Perseus, then it all sort of clicked into place. Because I always wondered, like, why is Mithras, why was this god so important? Why did anybody care? And I think really if you look at the Roman version of it, I mean, the Romans were pretty well advanced with war engines and plumbing. We saw some of the early steam engines being used. I mean, in relation to the rest of the world, the Romans were pretty styling with technology, and they probably saw the technology as a source of their power. I mean, all these soldiers and stuff, because they had these really elaborate war engines. And if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, you'll sort of get a sense of that. So I think that is why Mithras, who's not actually Mithras, who's actually Perseus, is so important to this day. And that's why you see him identified with all these major corporations. Because if you look at the major corporations, they're all technologically based.
I should mention too, also, we should include the Medusa, and in Persia, the Gorgons were widely worshipped as goddesses by the Persians. And Satana was a Gorgon and all these others. So this also ties in completely with Mithras.
Oh, it does.
And our modern time, suddenly Medusa has become some feminist trope,
Yeah, but it's interesting when you asked me about Nashville, because Nashville has the Parthenon. Nashville used to be known as the Athens of the South. And during one of these exhibitions, these sort of world fairs that they were always having back then, somebody had built a scale model of the Parthenon.
Cool.
This giant statue of Athena and so on. But it's interesting, talk about synchronicity. Because when you and I were talking about Medusa and Perseus on the Cosmic Keys, I had said, Athena's a bitch, Athena's a real bitch, which is true, right? I mean, she really is a Greco revamping of Tanit, these bloodthirsty, baby-eating sky goddesses. I mean,
like Anat and all those.
Exactly. Anat, Tanit. I mean, all these. And if you look at the etymology, you can sort of see the progression to Athena, right?
Mhm.
So I just think that's a really funny coincidence that we were just sort of talking about that. And then in the her city, um, we have this whole thing with all this myth for Perseus symbolism. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. The thing that I say is that we're in a spiritual battle, we're in a spiritual war, except for one side is just completely unilaterally disarmed, and the other side has the neutron bomb. I mean, that's basically the situation that we're at.
I think you nailed it on the head. I think that's our solution moving forward, regardless of what happens. We have to arm ourselves with magic and the spirits and whatever we can.
But we also have to be very careful, because when I talk about magic, I mean, like, the magic to me um, is not necessarily like spell casting. I mean, I think that a lot of that kind of magic can be very dangerous, and I think one of the dangers of it is ego, that your ego can get caught up in it, and you start to see yourself as the center of the world. And I think that, like, true magic to me is like, something I learned in the ocean, that you learn uh, when you're doing things in the ocean, that you have to sort of work with the ocean. If you're smart and you work hard, the ocean will work with you. It will, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, it will work with you. And that to me is magic. Like, to me, like, true magic is putting yourself in tune with these forces and these powers, and rather than trying to bend them to your will, bend your will to them. Because I think that the amount of power that you can tap into is infinitely greater, and will not cost you your soul, so to speak.
Don't fight the wind, bend the sails, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ego is very, very dangerous when you start to deal with these things. When you start to put yourself into these kinds of arenas, if you do have, like, that inflated sense of self, that will be used against you, and quite often will be used to destroy you. This is one of the reasons that, and I say this a lot in the book. I talk about how, like, there were just so many brilliant people. I mean, if you look at some of these, people who are involved in magic. I mean, John Dee, Paracelsus, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons. I mean, these people are all, like, super geniuses. I mean, these people, if they hadn't taken that turn, these are people who would be spoken of along with Einstein, I think. I mean,
Easily.
or Isaac Newton. These were incredibly brilliant people, but I think that they wanted to tap into something deeper, and they allowed their egos to guide them, and they were destroyed by it. I mean, literally, in the case of Parsons, literally destroyed by it.
They might have been assassinated.
Yeah,
That's my
but
possibility.
still, I mean,
Yeah, he kind of ruined his life already by then.
yeah, I mean, I think he was probably assassinated too, but he had done himself an enormous amount of harm because of his just phenomenal narcissism.
Yeah.
When you run around saying that you're the Antichrist, I mean, that's never going to end well, right?
No, no, no. That's what I call the toddlers when they misbehave. Awesome. And we got Dallas and we got the predictions. Are we missing a question, Vince? Or did
Oh
we
no,
get
no, I didn't even get into Dallas. So
back to Dallas?
all right.
And
This is just a recent discovery that I had made. I'd stumbled upon. So there's Pegasus Plaza, which is basically, I mean, I would have to sort of see better video or something that I've seen it, but it's basically, the whole story of Perseus is allegedly encoded into this entire landscape installation. I'm still kind of unsure. I mean, there's, like, water and walls and this, that, and the other thing, but the whole pitch behind it is that it is, the story of Perseus and Pegasus and Medusa and all this, Andromeda and all this kind of thing. But the interesting thing about it is that it's a very interesting neighborhood because it's only a few blocks away from Dealey Plaza and the triple underpass, and that in turn is only a few blocks away from the AT&T or the Dallas Discovery Center or something. I forget what it's
Mm.
called now. But the AT&T World Headquarters, where they have the giant golden Mithras, which used to be like literally right down the street from me. It used to be at the AT&T World Headquarters when it was located here.
No.
And then it moved down to Bedminster, and it was basically right down the street from Trump, which I find kind of interesting. And now it's in Dealey Plaza, so there's some magic going on there. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to do, but I think that's kind of it just happens to end up at Dealey Plaza. It's just hey, whatever. Whatever makes them happy, But that's the whole story with Pegasus Plaza, and I'm going to do more on that because I'm just fascinated by this whole conjunction, and that's also I don't remember a couple of years ago there was that sniper who was shooting cops who was like some ex-army guy, and he was right in that neighborhood, right near Mithras and Pegasus Plaza and Dealey Plaza, and was basically gunning cops down from a rooftop. So yeah, there's something going on there. I think that's probably another sort of a Ryan Krauss, Stephen Paddock kind of situation, or that guy at the Washington Navy Yard, the guy who was shooting people up, and it turns out that he was almost like a Zen monk, and he had been complaining that somebody was trying to get him to do something and fucking with his head and beaming signals into his head and so on. Most people who think that are crazy, but I think there's that like 1 in 1,000, are telling the truth, and he probably was one of them.
This is certainly Mithras' abode. So any other question, Vance, before I have some questions from Chris? Or
Well, yeah, they keep coming in, and let's see. Starting to, oh boy, the super chats scroll off the screen, but someone asked Tim Sarver actually whether or not he was confused because he thought Mithras was a good guy representing friendship and contracts and brotherhood. So are these people subverting the good to use in rituals for evil? Is that what's happening, or was Mithras not so much,
First of all, that's Mithra or Mitra. I mean, it's a different figure. It's like I said. So there was this, religion began that was basically a Perseus religion, and I would also argue, I think that it was also in part like a Horus religion. I think what happened is that we had the cults of Isis, the ISIS, which is basically the Catholic Church before the Catholic Church was the Catholic Church. I mean, if you look at how the the liturgy and the practices of the ISIS cults would be very familiar to people today. And you also had the Serapis cult, right? That that Ptolemy had basically created to keep the peace in Alexandria. So Horus sort of didn't really have a place in the Roman world, and I think that Mithraism was that place. I think that he was kind of combined with Perseus. Horus and Perseus was sort of conflated and sort of absconded with the identity of this Zoroastrian god Mithra, which is pretty different than Mithras. I mean, they ostensibly have the same identification, the same origins, but they're not alike at all. They're very much different figures. So, but then the second thing that I would say is that these people don't think of themselves as evil. I mean, the real supervillains don't think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as saviors, and that's what makes them so dangerous.
They're bringing heaven down on earth.
They don't think they're doing evil. They think that it's for the greater good, which are the 4 most dangerous words in the English language.
Road to hell is paved by blue check marks and good intentions, I would say.
Yeah, there you go.
So we didn't get to the monoliths yet. If you want to do that real quick before Miguel gets his question.
Yeah, that's just a bunch of bullshit. You know, first of all, I mean, they call them monoliths and they're obelisks. You know, I think that I don't know. That was just. I think that might turn out to be some sort of publicity stunt for something, or one, you know, almost like one of these viral challenges or something. I really don't put a lot of stock in it too much.
Okay, Miguel, go ahead.
I'm sorry if I'm disappointing anybody, but I don't really take that too serious.
They're not all
And they're
gold,
not hard
right?
to make, you know. I mean, it's not hard to get some sheet metal and a you know, welding gun and some rivets and stuff, and just sort of pop that together. I mean, that's not really. I mean, if you have rudimentary metalworking skills, you can make one of those things.
Yeah, there was one in my county, but you know, they're the copycats. The guys dropped it in Nevada. That was the interesting thing. It was in a setting that was like 2001, right? That's what got everybody's attention.
Well, the one in Utah.
Utah,
Yeah,
right?
originally.
Oh boy, awesome. Well, again, for the audience or those who are joining, this is AB Live. We're talking to Chris Knowles on the Endless American Midnight. Good crowd in the chats. As always, there will be an audio version once this is done and out on YouTube and all major podcast providers. And for those of you, please support this show. Definitely get Chris's book and all his works, which you can find at his site, secretsun.blogspot.com. And I've been reading those blogs for many, many years, and they just get more and more relevant. Good stuff. So, and in your book, Chris, definitely wanted to ask you this. Had Jason Horsley recently in his book 16 Maps of Hell, and he talks about the Manson family and the Cielo Drive murders. You provide probably even more perspective as you tie in Manson to the Process Church and Scientology and other things, and I still feel that's, I mean, of all the satanic rituals or magical rituals that have been done, this might be one of the greatest ones, and at least sort of expose what Hollywood really was, at least to us seekers. But many things I found interesting reading your articles on Manson in the Endless American Midnight is you write that Manson is a test run for the Joker archetype. What do you mean by that? Especially the Joker seems to be the great archetype of our modern age.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, you know, when I first started the blog, I had said that, you know, the great archetypes of the coming years were going to be the Joker and the Siren, and you know, I think it's pretty much played out like that. So what the Joker is that, you know, it's the fool, but it's the fool as the killer. You know, it's the killer clown. You know, and Manson, I think, really played that role starting, probably, like, I'm thinking maybe the early 80s, you know, when he used all the press attention and the media attention to create this figure, you know, Charles Manson as a clown, as a Joker, you know, really. I mean, he is he's a character who played the fool. I think, you know, he played the fool, but I think he really understood the basis of those archetypes. I mean, in the book, I have I had interviewed Bobby Beausoleil from prison, and I include the transcript of that interview, which I think is really important because I wanted to show the overlap between Manson and the Hate Street and the bikers and the Satan, you know, the Kenneth Anger kind of ritual magic, and then the Satanist, you know, Anton LaVey, and you know, Bobby was there for all of it, and you know, that's the reason that I included that interview. And I did the thing with Manson because I sort of saw the Manson situation as, like, you know about Operation Northwoods, you know, where this whole program that the CIA wanted to basically create a bunch of false flag events that would turn the American public against Cuba and
Mhm.
justify an
Yeah, like
invasion.
hijacking an airplane and all that nonsense.
Yes. So what I see happening in regard to like the Manson family and so on is, I don't want to say an equivalent of that, but almost like a corollary of that. That we had this program that I've been trying to wrap my head around for a number of years. I've talked about it in the context of MK Often, and because MK Often, of which there is very little known, um, seem to be contemporaneous with the rise of all this Satanism in pop culture and so on. All this glorification of Satanism and witchcraft and so on in the media. Like Anton LaVey sort of became like this
Right.
celebrity for a while, right? And then we had Rosemary's Baby, and then later on we had The Exorcist and so on. So what I really wanted to key in on is that I think that it almost seems to me that the Manson situation was beta testing for this, because the Manson family ties in. The tendrils seem to go everywhere. We have Hollywood, and I talk about this film that was made shortly after the arrests, after the family was arrested, called Ritual of Evil.
Yeah.
And whoever made this movie knew what was really going on at Cielo Drive, and really knew what was going on with the Manson family. And it just becomes really obvious. And then the Sharon Tate character, or the sort of stand-in for her. I mean, looks at the actress they cast looks exactly like Sharon Tate. I mean, it's just like it just becomes so blatant. But they were tying in like the process Church of the Final Judgment with that. Which were this very people have kind of whitewashed them in the past few years, but I see them primarily as a very sinister combination of a drug running operation and it's like a satanic brainwashing cult. I have a very dim view of them. I know people like Peter Lavender had sort of like made apologies for them, but I see them as just bad news. And I think the fact that they show up, you know, when all this bad shit's going on all over the place, I think is kind of telling. So the Manson thing, so he plays the fool, he plays the clown, that he doesn't know anything, but he does. He's kind of, the wink and the nod, and he's playing this foolish character, but he really knows what's going on. He really knows where the bodies are buried, literally. And the fact that Manson ties in quite directly, with the process and with the solo lodge of the OTO, for instance, but also Bobby Beausoleil and his connections to Kenneth Anger, and Kenneth Anger, the fact that he was being funded by like the Ford Foundation and J. Paul Getty Jr. I mean, what's that all about? Like what interest would they have in this sort of this weirdo making these 20-minute art films whenever the spirit moved him, which wasn't often. Why would they have a connection to him? That's a very, the Getty family is involved in a lot of strange stuff that has to do with this. So, yeah, I mean, I just see that the Manson family was very much the linchpin when a lot of these things that were, I don't know if you'd say they were being bandied about, really became operational. And this whole connection between ritual magic and drugs and prostitution and Hollywood, I think is something that continues to define this culture in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, you're right in one part, and I quote, it's the Cielo Drive murders were a long-running occult war on the American people being waged by powerful lunatics within the intelligence community. I think that explains it all, and I think you're right on.
I honestly believe that. I really do. I mean, I had wanted to put the some of the MK Often material in the book, but I mean, it was already 300 pages, and how small was I going to make the text? I mean, well over 100,000 words. I mean, it's a pretty hefty book, and there was only so much I could do, and I really think the whole MK Often thing really warrants its own book. If I can still continue to write about those things, which is an open question. But yeah, I mean, I really do see this. For instance, one of the things that I talked about on the blog, and I did not, I think I touch upon it in the book, but there were two events that I find to be extremely revealing. First of all was the premiere of Night of the Living Dead at a children's matinee
What the
in Chicago. And,
Oh my
Roger Ebert had written this really scorching report on this, just talking about how these kids were just being absolutely traumatized and they were just absolutely horrified. And, considering how strict, the Chicago Board of Censors were, this could not have been an accident. You don't show a movie like Night of the Living Dead at a children's matinee, by accident. That's not just an oversight. You know what I'm
no,
saying?
no.
So I think there's a very sinister intent. I mean, I think that was an experiment. I really do. But also, when you and I were growing up in Vance, you should certainly remember this. But the stories about people fainting and throwing up and freaking out at The Exorcist, right?
Oh, you bet.
So I went back and read a lot of those reports, and I started to think like, wow, this sounds like sonic weaponry. Like this sounds like these people were being subjected to sonic weaponry, because a lot of the specific anecdotes that were coming out of those theaters matched, a concurrent program that the U.S. Army was field testing in Southeast Asia called Operation Urban Funk, which was the use of sonic weaponry on, civilian populations. I mean, I think, listen, it's my opinion, and I certainly could be proved wrong, but I think that they were field testing that equipment at the showings of this movie, and they were doing so because they could always just explain it away as, oh, that these people are just a bunch of sissies sort of freaking out over a horror movie. It was the perfect cover, and the fact that William Peter Blatty was a psychological warfare expert in the 1960s. And also, I mean, if you've ever seen the movies, they're basically the same movie made twice, but The Ninth Configuration and
Good film. Yeah, I
Twinkle
love it.
Twinkle Killer Kane.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just, it doesn't get any more MK Ultra than that. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
there
it's
you
kinda
go.
like Jacob's ladder about what do you do with these broken soldiers? You make them do whatever you want, right? You make them into serial killers, soldier, hero. They're putty in your hands.
Yeah. So I just, I think that's very sinister. I really do. I think it's very disturbing. And we saw all the stuff like the slasher movies and so on, which we saw the beginnings of in the 60s, and then they really rose to prominence in the late 70s and the 80s. And I mean, this is something that I've looked at when you look at these sort of charts and graphs. I mean, like the rise and fall actually of like these slasher movies, is roughly it's roughly identical to the rise and fall of serial killers. I mean, you have these movies that were essentially glorifying serial killing. Why would you be surprised when that would be mirrored in the general population, which it certainly was. I
Yeah, I
don't
think
know how many of these people would confess to being directly influenced by them, but I'm sure a lot of them were. Like the whole stereotype of these guys reading like all these True Detective magazines and stuff, which are just basically snuff porn.
they were, and I think that's another good point. You talk about stealing our magic, but I think a lot of it isn't it to always be keeping us in a state of trauma and stress. I mean, isn't that what today's social media and news cycle? I mean, I know who was the guy from the Eagles who wrote that song "Dirty Laundry"?
John Henley, yeah.
Yeah, but now it's even more intense with social media.
But let me just interject for a second, because Don Henley wrote that song because he was upset that the news media had made hash of the fact that he was caught with two 16-year-old girls.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, they ended up to 32.
Yeah, there you go. So
Sorry.
whatever. I mean, it's funny too, because he's one of these guys who later presented himself as this this great liberal.
They all do. Yeah.
Isn't it always the way?
Yeah. So the last refuge of a sexual scoundrel, I guess.
The male feminists. Watch out for those male
Yeah,
feminists.
right. Yeah.
First one to rape you.
Seriously, right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's it, right? Keep us in a state of trauma has to be the other weapon they use. I mean,
well, look at Twitter. I mean,
yeah.
it's like I feel like I'm really weaning myself off of Twitter. It's easier now because I think that the platform is in decline. I mean, I almost feel like it's in free fall, because without Trump and all that kind of stuff, I mean, it has. What are all those idiots going to talk about? Like, what are they're absolutely forbidden to say anything negative about Biden. I mean, and Trump. I mean,
call them dribble cups. Yeah,
Grandpa Dribble Cup is my name for him. But what are they going to do? Are they going to just continue to dredge up things about Trump? I mean, it's funny just how Trump was this dominant figure in our national conversation, and now he's basically receded, if not vanished. I mean, I think it's a good thing, because I want the mass media to die painfully and slowly, and I think being deprived of Trump is gonna do exactly that. I think a lot of these people that have been making money hand over fist, people like Rachel Maddow and all these these Twitter
Seth Abraham's son and all these guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're in for a real hard fall, and I'm really going to enjoy it.
I got one more shot though. All the prosecution that New York is going to do against Trump, right? They're going to have that after the inauguration. I think you're going to see that.
I don't hold your breath. I think that it's like the cute people like, oh, the mass arrests are coming, and the left are the same way. It's just like, no, these people all look out for each other. They all know that they're dirty too, and if
they all have dirt on each other too.
Yeah,
they keep each other honest.
They really do. So I really don't put any stock in that. I don't think there's any upside for them. And like I said, these people protect each other. That's why you had 4 years of all the well, it became the Q thing in 17, but all these people like the arrests and the mass arrests and Guantanamo Bay and so on and so forth. It's just never going to happen. These people are never going to turn on. Even if they hate each other like cancer, they just know that if they breach that wall, that it's going to eventually fall on them too. They look out for each other, even if, like I said, even if they do hate each other. And first of all, I don't think that Trump and Hillary Clinton hate each other at all. I think it's all theater. I think everything with Trump has been theater, to be honest with you.
Yeah, now look where we're back at. Now, speaking of 2004, you suddenly have Biden and Cocaine Mitch and Pelosi once again working together to run the empire. They should just bring that jackass Paul Ryan out of retirement, and we'll have this sociopath empire together again. Isn't that it's like nothing has changed, Chris? The cycle just...
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how we're back. I mean, I've always seen the Bush 2, Clinton, or the Clinton, Bush 2, Obama administrations as being one administration.
Basically, yeah.
And I think that's kind of, the truth behind that has kind of revealed itself since, we realize just how tight these guys are, and that, Bush is best friends with Michelle and all this kind of stuff. So,
And
I
well,
mean,
the Clintons and the Bushes had a history before the Clinton was president. I mean, in
yeah, but
Arkansas.
even Trump was super tight with the Clintons. I mean, Trump was
Right.
in with all. Trump was a Democrat. You know, he was in
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Yeah.
people. You know what I mean? It's all just theater. It's all just a show. And people would like literally drive themselves insane. Like people have destroyed their lives and their brains and their souls over this theatrical production. You know, I mean that's why I really didn't want a lot. I mean, I wrote very little about Trump on the blog, and one of the reasons being is that I could never. First of all, I could never play. Find what are the angles? What is this about? What are they trying to do here? I could never get a grasp on that. I mean, I understand now, but I could never really wrap my head around it. But it was just like I could never understand like just all the on one side all the vitriol, and then the other side, this hero worship. I mean, it's like I've known this guy too long. I mean, I remember like I was in New York. I was working in New York when he started really becoming a major figure in the '80s, because what he was is that he was the point man for the takeover of Manhattan by the real estate barons. He was the sales force for that. So I just never trusted him because I just knew him too well. And he said all the right things, but he never did anything. He never did anything. He never walked his talk because they're not allowed to. They're just not allowed to. It's like, you really think that the people who run this country and run this economy and run the military, most importantly, are just going to throw the dice every 4 years and just like, well, we'll just see what this bunch of clowns is able to do. If they just fuck everything up, oh well, we'll try and scrape by. No, come on. It's just, this country is run by the military industrial complex, and anybody who tells you differently is insane.
Yeah,
You know
Biden
what I mean?
surrounded
They're
himself with as
insane.
many generals as Trump has. He's got he's got the Praetorian Guard, guns pointing at him. It's like,
Yeah,
you ain't stepping. This is the line, and you don't step outside of this line, Grandpa
no,
Dribble
you
Cups.
don't. Or you'll end up like JFK did, right? I mean,
Exactly.
JFK said, all right, we're gonna put Northwoods to a halt, and we're not gonna provide air support for the Bay of Pigs, and and then the UFO thing, of course, which is really about classified aircraft. It's sort of given this whole patina with, this is another thing that I devoted an entire chapter to, that presidents who've poked their nose into that hornet's nest get stung, because that's about Lockheed and, McDonnell Douglas and all these huge, Raytheon, it's all about classified military aircraft. It doesn't, I don't think it has anything to do with space aliens.
So you think with Podesta and Clinton back in the game, we'll get more, or
I don't know if they are back in the game, to be
yeah,
honest
you're
with
right.
you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
Well,
know if they are.
yeah, there's a thing that was tacked on to this relief bill. 180 days. In 180 days, they're
Oh
supposed
yeah,
to provide. Did you hear about that? They're
oh
supposed to
yeah,
provide
yeah.
reports, like a disclosure report, what the government's doing with
Get out
their
of here.
investigations. Yep.
Yeah, and that was Marco Rubio's little.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Marco Rubio, Republican from NASA. From the state of NASA,
Mm.
right?
Did you say Nassau?
Yeah, not
Nassau.
NASA. Right? I mean, because NASA is just a big money boondoggle. So yeah, I mean, this whole all this UFO stuff, I just I don't take seriously, and of course this whole Tom DeLonge operation is falling apart now. Chris Mellon just quit, and Lou Elizondo quit, and some other people, because that whole operation, I don't know what they were trying to achieve, but all they ended up doing was just basically destroying ufology. Maybe that was
I think that might be it.
maybe that was the intended effect. Like the only way they could destroy ufology would be like wave this fake disclosure flag in their faces, and and that would, everybody would just see how silly and lame the whole thing was, and just walk off. I mean, I don't think UFOs are, I don't think they're alien spacecraft, made out of exotic metals. I think that there's something else. I mean, I've been saying this for years. I don't believe that. I'm not a nuts and bolts guy. I mean, I do.
Plasma beings.
I do think UFOs are real. And I didn't really talk about it too much in the book, but we had an experience where we sort of just stood on our front porch and just stared at one for, I don't know, 20 minutes. It was a chevron, a pretty classic chevron. And interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, people in like Texas and Colorado were posting videos of them. It could be, I just looked at it and go, that's not aerodynamic in any sense that I understand. And somebody said, those big lights that you see on those chevrons could be some sort of plasma engine. You know what I mean? It could very well be. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think I've seen UFOs, not too far away. One of the things I think I might have added this into the additional material in the ebook, but talking about how we'd seen like these two orange orbs basically bird dogging this Cessna when we crossed the border into New Hampshire. And again, a lot of stuff shows up and he will live up in the sky. I wasn't even conscious of it. But yeah, I mean, I do think UFOs are very real. I've seen them, but I just don't think they're any technology that we understand. I really don't. I don't believe that there's all this technology being squirreled away in these deep underground bunkers. I mean, I do think that there are exotic aircraft and probably exotic drones and things that are being worked on by Lockheed at places like Area 51, but I don't think they're what I saw. Definitely.
Ben Rich did say we had the technology to take ET home and a few other things.
Yeah, I don't really. No,
years ago. Don't think so.
I think he was just screwing with people.
Lockheed advertisement.
Yeah, well, it's funny because do you remember the Gulf War? So there was this whole thing where they were justifying by saying that Saddam had all these weapons of mass destruction, and like, look, he said he did, and then he sort of came out and said, "Well, we really didn't, but we said we did, so we wouldn't get invaded by Iran or whomever." You know what I mean? We wouldn't have a battle with I don't know, Syria or something. We didn't really have them. We had some stuff that the Americans gave us, but it all sort of decomposed and we buried it in the desert and stuff like that. So I think that, a lot of the stuff that sort of entered the ufological canon is basically just, a lot of that. It's sort of psyops and so on. Like this whole thing, like we've got, all these basically godlike ways of controlling the weather and stuff. I don't believe any of that either. I think the more it sounds like a comic book, the more it's probably a lie. I really do. I'm very, very skeptical about that stuff.
I hope you stay on Twitter. One of my favorite things is you trolling Boston Robotics for years.
Yeah,
you just won't stop. You just won't stop.
Oh, you don't like the robotic doggies?
Oh my God, it drives me crazy. So people are like, "Oh my God, we're all," I think that is psychological warfare. I really do. I think it's to intimidate people to think that, like we're going to have like Skynet and Terminator. That's all fake. It's all CGI cartoons. You know what I mean? It's not even good CGI cartoons because those things, those Atlas robots. What I posted on Twitter was when they really wheeled one of those things out in front of a crowd and the thing just fell on its ass. Those things aren't doing parkour and tap dancing. It's nonsense.
I'm gonna take your job away at the McDonald's.
It's all just to intimidate people to think that this stuff is you better watch out. You better stay in line because we're gonna stick a Terminator robot on your ass. It's all nonsense. It's all
RoboCop. You will comply.
You don't like Sophia? Remember that Sophia?
Don't get Chris started on
Sophia, man. That is some serious bullshit. That just pisses me off. That really makes me angry because I remember seeing like those stupid robots back in the 80s, and it seems to me they were better than that Sophia. That thing is just a piece of trash. But I've seen those things. Like I saw those things in some sort of trade show. I forget even what it was. I've seen those things up close. And like they look pretty impressive on television, but when you see them in person, it's just like, yeah, that's a mannequin. It's stupid.
Yeah,
like
pre-programmed. Some guy backstage pressing buttons, you know.
Yeah, it's a talk bot. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
I've been saying this. I don't think the Matrix is ever going to happen. I don't think Terminator is ever going to happen. I don't think that Westworld is ever going to happen. I think we're at the end. We're at the end of the technological era. You know, we really are. And a lot of people, you know, you're more responsible commentators and science writers will say this, you know, that, you know, this whole thing about Moore's law. I mean, Moore's law was broken a long time ago. You know, computing power is not doubling every year, like they said it was, or every 6 months, or whatever it is. It's not happening. We are at the end of the era of, you know, great breakthroughs in technology, and all the low hanging fruit has been picked. And you know, I think what we're in for now is a very, very slow and grinding period where our problems are going to increase, but our technology is not going to, you know, increase, you know, to solve those problems. I think that it's going to be a very major issue. And I think the fact that we have this absolute stupid cartoon nonsense like Boston Dynamics just brainwashing people, you know, it's irresponsible because people think, well, you know, things are going to get bad, but, you know, the technology will fix it. No, it's not. It's not.
That's a theme of your book, Chris, is that the technological utopia is not coming.
No,
You
it's not.
mentioned this over. There's no, what's that quote by Peter Thiel you have? He said, we had great success in the world of electrons, no so much with atoms. We wanted flying cars. Instead, we got 140 characters. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
definitely a recurring theme in your book.
oh yeah, it is. And that's something I've been writing about for a number of years. Because listen, I mean, I was like a true believer in all this kind of scientism and technological miracles, you know, starting back like in the 80s. And you know, I got my suspicions were raised when I sort of started seeing like the same stories that I remember reading, you know, back in the 80s, just being recycled, just being dragged out for a new bunch of rubes, you know. It's like, you know, people, oh, DARPA's doing this and DARPA's doing that. You know, it got to be like my skepticism of that, you know, even back in the 90s where I said that DARPA was just basically a fax machine and a subscription to the X-Men, you know, because, you know what I mean? Because something would show up in an X-Men comic and then like a month later you'd see like DARPA said, oh yeah, we're doing this, you know? No, like it makes me angry. It does. It legitimately makes me angry. Like I'm very angry about this Boston Dynamics shit because, you know, first of all, those are just remote controlled toys and they can't do anything by themselves. They need to be remotely controlled, you know. And you if you look carefully at a lot of those videos, you always see like a guy, you know, off screen going like this, you know what I mean? But even then, it's just, they're not. It's just nonsense. It's just bullshit. It really is.
Well, they're going to put his brain inside, you know. That's
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too.
Any
Like,
minute.
transhuman. I mean, I was really surprised because when I went back and was looking into my archives, which, you know, thousands of posts, you know, that I was declaring transhumanism over like 4 or 5 years ago, and it wasn't just me. It was because, you know, this was welling up in a lot of the news outlets that I was reading, that, you know, this whole idea that, you know, you're gonna inject your brain into a AI robot. It's never gonna fucking happen. I'm sorry. I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but we're never going to Proxima Centauri. You know, the E drive is just, it's all bullshit. You know, it's all just to keep people hooked into the machine. And you saw the exact same thing back in the 30s. So back in the Depression, when everybody was just really suffering and everybody was really poor and desperate, you would have all these, you know, this world of tomorrow kind of stuff that would be dragged out. It's like, well, you know, listen, things are kind of tough now, but if you buckle down and do what you're told, you know, you're going to have like, it's going to be the Jetsons, you know, by the end of the 1940s. You know, of course it
Right.
wasn't, and it never will be. But that's something that I think we really need to deprogram ourselves of. You know, I mean, one of the things that I've really come to think about, like, what am I doing and why am I doing it? You know, one of the things is that it's spell breaking. You know what I mean? I want to break these spells. You know, I want to break the spells that are being cast on us. And one of the spells is just all this techno utopian nonsense. I mean, the more technology we have, the worse everything's getting. The more mental illness you see, the more suicide you see. And if you look at cities that, the cities that are, they said 20 or 30 years ago were on the cutting edge, like Singapore and Tokyo and Hong Kong and stuff, people are miserable. The highest rates of unhappiness in the world. Nobody's getting married. Nobody's having kids, because they have no faith in the future. That's really what that's about. Um, the more technologically advanced we become, particularly in these urban settings, and a lot of this book is an anti-urbanist screed, to be honest with you. The more we see this stuff, the more miserable people become. It's not the answer. You know what I mean? Technology is not the answer. And to be honest with you, I mean, like, so everybody goes, well, look what we're doing now with the Zoom and stuff. I mean, this is stuff that Jacques Vallée, for instance, was working on in the early 70s. This is nothing new. Electric cars aren't nothing new. There were electric cars in the 1870s. You know what I mean? They just weren't viable commercially. Most of the stuff that we think is wonderful and miraculous, it just isn't. And it's not going to solve our problems, and it's making our problems worse. It's making mental illness work, which is the big thing with me. I mean, social media is making mental illness much worse. The cyberbullying, which is something that's affected my people, and that were important to people in my family very closely, is out of control. The gang stalking and the cancel culture, which is just really just an elaborate form of gang stalking and bullying, with this sort of self-righteous, ooze caked over it, right? No, we need to break these spells. Yeah, and a lot of this technology is fun and useful, and we can make use of it, but it's not going to save us, and it's not going to solve our problems. It's just
Well,
not.
it's using us at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and like, so we hear all this stuff with like AI and stuff, and so much of this stuff is overblown. And I've had like people write to me like, "Listen, I'm working on these programs. It's nothing like people's, what they say it is. It's just basically just elaborate pattern recognition machines, right?" So, no, it's Wintermute for all you Gibson nerds out there, probably, which is nobody, but Wintermute or the Matrix or whatever you want to call it, it's just not coming. It just isn't. It's just going to be like more and more intrusive and invasive surveillance equipment, because that's really all that we've had. I mean, I was just thinking about it. I was thinking about, like, when I was doing my work, when I had a day job, right? The work I was thinking about the programs that I worked in. It's like, well, they had more bells and whistles, but were they substantially different than the programs that I was working on in the late 80s? No. Like, I did a lot of work, vector work in Adobe Illustrator. Yeah. I mean, we had like filters and Pathfinder and layers and stuff, but it was same program. It's none of that stuff made my job any easier, because I had to like sit there and like map out all the points, So we need to break that spell. I think this is something that I'm really concerned about, because I think it's doing us an enormous amount of harm. I really do. And that's at the top of the list. And there are others, but I think this whole notion of techno salvation really needs to be at the top of the the spell breaking list.
I definitely agree. As somebody said in the chat, it is ironic we're doing it on YouTube, but hell.
But but like I said, so I mean, this is technology that's existed for 50 years now. You know what I mean? It's just, it wasn't operational. It wasn't viable in mass use. And yeah, it's useful.
It is
But
useful.
it's not something that you should worship. It's not something that you should seek salvation in, and that's the problem, is that, people say, "Oh, I believe science," or trust the science. You're not supposed to trust the science. You're supposed to test the science. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to
Prove
believe
the
science
science.
because science is just a system of understanding. You know, it's not a dogma. It's not a creed. It's just a methodology, and literally a methodology. I mean, that's what science is. And like I said, I mean, what 70% of it is just it's garbage. You know, it's make work. I think I really come to think that a lot of science is just make work to keep people busy who might otherwise be building bombs. You know what I mean? Like keep all those Ted Kaczynskis occupied so they're not like
In a cabin
sending
somewhere.
us nail bombs. You know what I mean? I honestly believe that. I really think that there's just like let's just keep people busy. And I think so much of the economy is just make work. You know, just keep people out of here. Here, do this tedious, soul destroying thing 8 hours a day. You know, keep you out of our hair. And then by the time you're done, you'll be too tired to do anything about it, right?
I would certainly, definitely agree. Keep us busy, keep us in a state of stress, take away our magic, and we're finding all the problems. Any questions from the audience, Vance? Or you'll
Oh, I
see.
got a bunch of them here. I'm not sure how much time we're going to have to answer them, but
It's our
see.
year end, so if Chris has times, I have time.
Yeah. Well, Chad Warren wanted to know about this. Tracy Twyman was looking into Michael Bloomberg's London office being built over a Mithraeum. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, first of all, it wasn't built over a Mithraeum. He had a Mithraeum moved and installed to be in his headquarters. So it's just like it's another level of commitment over that. You know,
Okay.
I really like that site. Well, you know, there's a Roman Mithraeum there that we want to preserve. Oh, okay, I'll just build over it. No, he actually had it moved and installed in the lower floors of his building. So
Did like kill bulls in it?
Years old.
I mean, did he kill bulls in it?
probably, you know, after hours, I wouldn't be surprised. No, I mean that's to me demonstrates a level of commitment. I mean, I think Mike Bloomberg is. I don't understand how that guy's so rich because the Mike Bloomberg we saw in the debates was an idiot, was just a moron, and I loved when just like Elizabeth Warren just eviscerated him. She just like she took his ball sack and put it in his goddamn mouth. I mean, it was beautiful. So I don't understand how that guy is so powerful.
Yeah, he should have seen it coming a mile away. He should have known that was somebody was going to attack him on all that.
Oh yeah, but it was beautiful. But I think that doing that, you know, that raises his standing in the hierarchy. You know, because I've said so. Let's look at who I've sort of identified as having this Mithras fixation. So the Statue of Liberty, right? For one, anybody who thinks that's a woman has probably never seen an actual woman in their lives. I don't know. I'm gonna have to work on that one. But so Rockefeller Center, right? The Rockefellers, most powerful and important family in American history, probably, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we have the quote unquote Prometheus, which is Mithras there. Goodyear, right, which has the Perseus's legs, right? And then so we're talking about both Mithras and Perseus. So we have Bloomberg, the Rockefellers, Exxon Mobil, the largest energy concern in the world and one of the richest corporations in the world. They have the Pegasus, which is related to all this. Goodyear, right? Gosh, what are some of the others? There are others. Oh, of course. I'm sorry, AT&T, right? With with Mithras Aeon, which is now. I mean, AT&T is like they're on their way to rebuilding the old Bell Empire, right? So they're going to be like, once
remember Harvey Weinstein's former before he opened his own movie business, and they had the Pegasus. I forgot the name.
That was TriStar.
It came out.
Right,
Yeah,
I was thinking of that.
Yeah, TriStar was they were a subsidiary of Columbia. So but we talk about Columbia, with They say it's like,
Right, right.
really, maybe that's just another Mithras in drag, but just, it's like a really good Mithraic drag queen. I mean, I'd have to work on that.
Yeah, and for the
Uh,
audience, probably that don't know, there were in a certain sects of Mithras, at a certain level, men had to dress like women and perform naughty stuff on their higher ups, right, Chris?
well, yes, and
Mm.
one
And
of
they
the
wore a crown, and they had to carry a torch and all that.
yeah, and one of the things that I've mentioned, quite a bit is how Michael Bloomberg, again back to Bloomberg, is part of this uh, secret society that's not so secret of like Wall Street people and everything, where the pledges have to dress as women. So I sort of see that as just an outgrowth of the Mithraic system. But the Mithraic system was very influential on Freemasonry, and then all the college fraternity, what they call the Greek system. If you look at the history, the Greek system really arose because of the anti-Masonic movement. So you had the anti-Masonic movement that basically drove a lot of these lodges underground, and in answer to that, we had uh, the fraternal system, the Greek system, a lot of which were just fronts for Masonic lodges. And then you had like groups like the Lions and the Rotary and JCs and just a lot of these sort of quasi Masonic groups, that even used the blue and gold, right? Certainly the Lions and Rotary. Uh, a lot of these sort of quasi Masonic groups actually use the Masonic colors. I think it's probably, at least in their origin, they were fronts for Masonic lodges. So I mean, this stuff is hardwired into our culture, and there's sort of like this popular misconception that all the founding fathers were Masons, which they weren't. But I think it's fair to say that all the founding fathers were part of some secret
Mhm.
society or other. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
a lot of them were members of rival organizations. For instance, John Adams and John Quincy Adams were, um, initiates of the Order of the Dragon, and they were
Mhm.
actually John Quincy Adams was very much involved in the anti-Masonic party in the early 1800s. So you
Oh,
really,
and here's another one too, the famous, pirate symbol, the skull and bones, that's originally a Mithraic symbol, which, of course, skull and bones adopted, and so did the pirates.
yes, I've actually decoded. I haven't blogged on this yet, but I've decoded all the Masonic tracing boards, and
Mm.
it's actually it's so simple and obvious. It boggles my mind why I didn't do this earlier, but I don't think I was thinking in those regards. I've also um, decoded Baphomet, and I've decoded the Goat of Mendes. The satanic head.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, just as an exclusive to your podcast here, to your
All
stream.
right.
So the Goat of Mendes, if you're familiar with it, it's the circle and the inverted pentagram and the
Mhm.
goat's head. And then in Hebrew letters, there's Leviathan spelled out, the
Yeah.
Hebrew letters for Leviathan. So, I mean, if you just look that up online, uh, that's pretty much what it is. What that is the conjunction of Aries and Cetus. Cetus is the whale, the Leviathan. So it's that part of space. And if you look at the head, which is often depicted as the tail of Cetus, it's basically an inverted pentagon. It's a pentagon pointing down. Uh, and it's my belief that the conjunction of those two astrological symbols was encoded into the Gaudimendes. And I'll tell you why, because the inverted pentagon and Cetus. So Cetus is below the ecliptic, right?
Mhm.
And that's getting into the underworld. If you look at the mythology all across, Judaism, Egypt, Mesopotamia. They all saw beneath the ecliptic as the underworld, and that's where Osiris was said to travel, at night, and so on and so forth. But the Cetus, the whale, the Leviathan, since the pentagon is pointing down, it's pointing away from God. It's moving away from God, and God is, like I said, it's Cepheus, which means the gardener. So the Garden of Eden is Cepheus. It's the northern pole, of the celestial globe. And, again, if you just look at a star map, you'll see this conflict between, or this rivalry encoded into Cepheus and Draco. And that's basically where that entire cosmology, I don't want to say where it comes from, but I think was how it was encoded into the constellations. Because if you look at, Egyptian and Babylonian constellations were much different than what we saw developed by the Greeks. And I think there was a Judaic influence on that, and other cultures in the Mediterranean. So the goat of Mendes is the conjunction of so the ram, obviously the goat, and the inverted pentagram, which is the inverted pentagon of Cetus, and Cetus is literally Leviathan, and that was sort of the giveaway for me. It's like, why is Leviathan being identified with a goat or a ram? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it makes perfect sense if you look at the sky, if you look at the night sky, because you have the conjunction of Aries and Cetus. So there you go.
Very cool astrotheology. Love it.
I call it theoastrology.
Theoastrology. All right.
just have to be different,
You have another question from the audience, fans?
Yeah, poor Sticky Marks has been waiting for his question.
Wow,
and I don't know what this means, so I'm just going to say it. Tell Chris, the night skies, ScopeX Harvard. What is ScopeX Harvard? Does this mean anything?
Harvard University?
ScopeX Harvard? I don't know. Well,
can I look that up so I don't?
No, don't worry about it.
No.
Yeah,
ask him to clarify.
Yeah, well, you just did, so he hears you. So another one we have, while he's clarifying, if he does, the intrusive surveillance state is the same as the community state, multi-godhead and Genesis? That's the question.
If you choose to look at it that way, I don't think that's invalid. I think that there's a lot of sense to be made in that. That's the whole thing, is that I'll go back to geek culture. Star Trek, right? So Star Trek is seen as this utopian future. Star Trek basically depicts a military dictatorship, an expansionist military dictatorship, by the way. The Federation is always looking to expand, right? And it's always like fighting with people.
Oh, yeah.
Who basically resist this expansion. That's really what it boils down to. And it's funny because if you watch like the first episode with the Klingons, it's always this battle, over, whose territory is being impinged upon, which of course is drawn from the Cold War and so on.
Neutral zone, all this, yeah.
Yeah, but the Federation is it's a military dictatorship, and it's absolutely totalizing, because you always have that little, your little thing, your little communicator, your little lapel pin, where they can always find out where you are and they can always listen to what you're saying. It really is. It's like 1984 in space, right? Yeah, and the civilians are always troublemakers. If you ever watch, there's two interesting things I'm talking about the shit now because the stuff now is garbage, but sort of classic, like particularly like Next Generation era and so, and the original cast movies in the 80s and so on.
Right.
The thing that you notice is that the troublemakers are always civilians, right? Or people who resist the Federation. And if you ever see the Federation Council, most of the people sitting on the Federation Council are Starfleet admirals. You know,
Yep.
so it's just the giveaway. I mean, this is a socialist military dictatorship expansionist empire. And there's actually a great episode of Deep Space Nine, which is my favorite Star Trek series because it really sort of takes the piss out of Star Trek, where like this Star Trek officer who joins this resistance group called the Maquis, you know, basically spells it all out. You know, that this is an expansionist military dictatorship, and the worst sin is leaving it. You know.
You can check out any time, but you can never leave.
What else do we get, Vance?
Well, we got Anita Rita, and I won't say the other parts of the name because I'll mispronounce them. You spoke about much of this world control being done by certain families. What is your vision on family curses?
Well, from like the most basic viewpoint on that, just I think the psychological effect of them can have, you know, pretty profound effects. So just like your baseline materialistic viewpoint, you know what I mean? Just your sort of your lowest rung on the ladder there. I think that family curses, you know, can certainly be valid. I mean, it's something that I think plays on higher levels than that, but that's a whole other discussion.
Now, I've been thinking about half the night about the Clinton death list.
Are you on it, Vance? Did you make it?
No, I'm not on it. I don't think so, but a lot of other people apparently are. There's very little of these things that I believe in, but that's one thing that really, like, I think, you're talking about Star Trek, the Tantalus field, in the alternate Star Trek universe where that the woman, alternate Kirk's girlfriend has this little screen and she like makes his enemies disappear. That's what I think of Hillary.
Yeah, I think that she's a rather sinister figure, and I've thought that since day one. To be honest with you, I that woman has always just given me the heebie-jeebies. And I saw Bill Clinton did some sort of Zoom talk or some sort of video message or something, and he looked just so old. I mean, he looked like the Crypt Keeper. He looks really sick and old. So I don't know if she's like draining his life essence or something.
Got the fangs going at night.
Yeah, I think you know, at the very least she's a witch, you know. And I'm not talking like Wicca witch. I'm talking like black magic witchcraft, like
yeah.
witchcraft, you know.
I don't see Bill as doing things like that. I mean, whatever his politics are, I think he likes people. I mean, it seems to me he loves people, and she's the
he loves people, especially if they're young and female.
Oh yeah, that's right. We found that out recently. I just love those little gals. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think there's a kind of spellcraft at work there too, you know, because I think the way these politicians kind of rise always out of nowhere, right? This, you know,
Yeah.
Clinton and Obama, they're just like, where did they come from, right? I think the way that the media sort of constructs, you know, not only the media, but the entire establishment sort of constructs the spell. This, you know, they cast a spell with these figures who we know nothing about and we have no reason to trust, become heroes for no reason at all, really. You know, I mean, do you remember like Obama was given like the Nobel Prize before he even
before he did anything, yeah.
You know, and that, you know, Obama's a really interesting. I had a lot of fun during the first Obama term because the ritualism was just so blatant. You know, like they were sort of carting him around you know, he went to the pyramids and he was at the Pillar of Hercules and you know, just all these kind of very highly charged symbolic places. You know, this guy who basically was a nothing, you know, I mean, he had no accomplishments under his belt. He was basically created out of whole cloth. And, you know, it's interesting to see, like, when they leave office, how diminished they are by that, you know, that they, you always sort of wonder, like, why did we listen to these people? You know what I mean? Clinton
Well,
is, Clinton in a just world, Clinton would just be like a particularly prosperous
used car salesman.
used car salesman. Exactly.
I would like this nice Chevy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what Obama, like. He just would have just. Who knows what he would. Maybe he'd be working with some sort of nonprofit organization or something.
Yeah, or it'd be a college professor. I could see.
Or
this
yeah, but I mean, these people are all mediocrities. They really are, and they're just pliable. But again, I do think this is a spell. It is a form of spellcraft. And whether you choose to look at that in like sort of this baseline psychological way, I mean, be my guest. But that's just the way, I perceive these people. I mean, who are they? Like, why are they?
God, and
What have
imagine
they
if
accomplished?
Trump fades away. God forbid if fucking Mitt Romney becomes the face of the party. We're finished.
And it's interesting too because Arkansas and Chicago are both like, you got a mob state and a mob city, right?
Yeah.
So Clinton was governor of this unbelievably corrupt state, and there was all the things with like Mena Airport, and the drug running and Barry Steele and just all this kind of stuff. So was his great skill, was his great usefulness, was his ability to keep his mouth shut. You know what I mean? Chicago. I mean, Chicago's been, about Chicago, Miguel, right? Total gangster town.
The whole state is horrible. It always ranks like after Louisiana, the most corrupt state. It's just in Chicago.
And I just read that it's third. You're third after New York and California for
wow.
largest outflow of people.
Yes, it's hemorrhaging people like 7 years in a row because the taxes, the corruption, the violence is it's got the worst of everything.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think that the way the way we've sort of constructed politics as religion, I think it's filling like a void in people. Like people would, however serious they took it. It's like I would be a Catholic or a Methodist or whatever. You belong to some sort of religious denomination, and that even if you weren't particularly devout, it gave you some kind of context. It gave you some sort of larger tribe almost that you could identify yourself with, right? And once the priest scandals, that started in the 80s and really welled up in the 90s and the early 2000s, once that stuff really took hold, it just started this process where a lot of people were just cast into exile. I mean, that's really what I see. And I think, social media and, the religious stuff, the Trump and the Q and everything like that, filling that void for people who have been, just basically cast adrift spiritually. And, I think that's a very intractable problem, and it's a major problem or it's a major part of what we're looking down the barrel at, where people, for not particularly compelling reasons, will identify themselves with a political party that doesn't give two shits about them. You know what I mean? Like I always said, we have two Republican parties in this country. We have the Republicans, and we have the Rockefeller Republicans, which is are trading under the name Democrat right now. It's basically a hostile takeover. It kind of reminds me of like when the Scientologists took over the Cult Awareness Network. They took over their nemesis and traded under their brand name, and that's what I see the Democrats as. I just see them as Rockefeller Republicans who distinguish themselves from standard issue Republicans with all this woke bullshit. So you asked me before about like where I see the country going in 2030. I'm not going to say, but if these trends continue, this absolutely absurd political tribalism continues particularly, and just this spiritual exile that people find themselves in, this state of spiritual impotence, really. You know, nothing good is going to come out of this. Nothing good is going to come out of it. We are just in a world of hurt if these issues are not addressed. And that's, you know, one of the reasons that I wrote the book. I did write a lot of new material for the book, but it's the reason I constructed the book the way I did, because I just want to impart to people that a culture and a society cannot exist without some sort of spiritual connection. And I don't think people can actually exist. You know, there are a lot of people who could, you know, say they're atheists or agnostics or something, but that only makes sense within a non-atheistic and non-agnostic society. You know what I'm saying? It's just not going to work. It's never worked. You know, and this is something that I said quite explicitly in the book, is that, you know, when in history, in the past, when cultures and societies become atheistic and agnostic or whatever, hedonistic, whatever you choose to label it as, they collapse inevitably. There's no example of a successful and self-sustaining atheistic society, you know, because even if you don't believe necessarily in the cosmological or theological claims of that religion, it gives your life some sort of context, you know, some sort of identity. And without that identity, everything just splinters off, everything atomizes, you know? And I believe that this is really a major problem that needs to be tackled head on. And I don't know who's doing it. You know, I don't see anybody else out there, you know, raising some of these questions, unless they're doing so from just a very standard issue kind of evangelical, well, you're all going to hell because you don't believe what I believe. You know, and that's
it's
me.
interesting, Chris, in your book, you write years ago that, well, sports and movies is a place where we can all come together. They got rid of that this last year. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
Sports and movies, another divisive arena where you can all fight on the streets about it. It's like,
Even then,
well,
that's a
it's
distraction,
evil.
right? Those are distractions. People, unless they talk about it after the movie, you know, whatever real issues were brought up in the movie, it's just a way to distract yourself.
Yeah, but you know what? It was the last vestige of some sort of commonality. So it used to be like, you know, there was the whole idea of must-see TV and what they called like the water cooler moments, or whatever, you know, where people, like, even if you didn't like that person, like down in accounting, and you had nothing in common with them, you know,
You
you
could talk about the last episode of MASH at least, or
exactly, or
JR shooting,
Friends or
getting
Seinfeld. I mean, you had
That's
some,
true.
and if
Yeah.
not that, then sports. You know, I mean,
No.
I've been in a lot of situations where I've seen like people who have absolutely nothing, like a black guy and a guy like maybe somebody from El Salvador, and then, you know, somebody from the Midwest or whatever, you know, like all these people who just have like nothing in common, but they could talk about like, oh, did you see like this game? You know what I mean? Like they could have some sort of, you know, some sort of common ground through that, and that's been destroyed now. You know,
Yeah.
sports are really, I mean, everything that would unite people who would otherwise be maybe even at each other's throats has self-destructed, or been destroyed from the outside. You know, I find it interesting that Hollywood is kind of collapsing at the same time. Like marijuana is being legalized in a number of states, or at least being decriminalized. So it's like, how much of that funny money, you know, where they somehow had access to hundreds of millions of dollars to make a movie that didn't make back a tenth of its budget, that they could just continue on when any other company would be bankrupted by that. You know, how much of this money that was showing up in that town was just basically laundered drug money, and I would venture that it was
Is
a
that
lot.
the secret to Hollywood accounting?
I really believe that. But, you know, it's funny because I start to almost believe that, like, the economy, like the real economy, is like money laundering, you know, human trafficking, and drug.
Mhm.
And then everything else after that is sort of just like a tack on, you know, it's ancillary to like the real economy, which is about You know, well, they talk. What is it? God, which is guns, oil, and drugs. You know, but I would add like, you know, again, I would add like money laundering and tax piracy and human trafficking and, you know, God knows what else.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there's a saying, I forgot who said it, that, in a fascist society, everything is politicized, and
Well, that
I
makes
think
up
that's it.
fascist.
Sports, yeah, sports, entertain everything has to have some political traction or
Well, that's
friction.
us.
That's us. I mean, the empire
Everything has to
never
be
ended.
politicized. You know, I mean,
You can't yeah, you've written about how escapism is a good thing as a society. We leave our troubles behind. We get together by the fireplace or the TV. That's gone. You know,
yeah.
families at each other's throats, friends, co-workers, blah, 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 this party, this party, Antifa, Proud Boys. It's just, it's a grift. I mean, but we all know this. It's a grift.
Well, you know, I always ask, you know, cui bono, you know, like who
Right.
benefits from that, you know? Because, you know, the interesting thing is that, you know, a lot of these corporations aren't benefiting from that. I mean, I guess like Amazon and, you know, Apple or whatever, you know, sort of at the top of that pyramid. But a lot of these companies, if they don't have like a mainstream audience, then they have to deal with um, marketing their products, you know, to a bunch of subcultures, right? Or a bunch of atomized audiences. And that's very difficult. Believe me, that's not easy. You know, you have to, you know, that really balloons the advertising budget, you know, where say back in the 70s, you could just, you know, Budweiser would have one ad, you know, like with the Clydesdales and everything like that. You know, when you say Bud, blah, 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 you said a lot of things nobody else could say.
Right.
You say Bud, you know, but anyway, you could have that one ad that would be on for 2 months on all the stations, which there were like 5 or 6, right? So all the TV stations would run that one ad, and everybody saw that ad, and everybody understood that ad. And now it's like, well, you've got all these microbrews, and you know, whatever. You've got all these different, you know, you've got like, you know, a straight audience, you've got a gay audience, you've got a Latin audience, a black audience, you have a left audience, you have a right audience, you know, you have a female audience, you have a male audience, you have all these different interest groups that you need to mollify. And a lot of times when you try to mollify one, and we've seen this, by the way, you know, like with the Gillette ad and stuff like that, you know, when you try to mollify one section of that consumer base, you end up pissing off the other section. So it's like a minefield these days, because there's nothing tying a culture together, and that's, you know, when you get like, so one of the things that I was thinking about and I wrote about in the book is that like, so what is the purpose of secret society? Well, we'll go back. When did Freemasonry really bloom? When did it really flower? Well, it really flowered during the age of imperialism. You know, when the British East India Company was setting up shop in other countries, and you had like, you know, all these corporations like, you know, the Plymouth Corporation or the Virginia Corporation setting up these,
Right.
you know, these plantations, or just, you know, just basically you had like corporate imperialism. Well, how do you instill loyalty among all these different people that you were going to be dealing with in all these different countries and different religions and different languages and cultures? Well, you say, listen, you know, the real secret is like, you know, this Hiram Abiff and, you know, blah, blah, and it's three
Yeah.
degrees. And it's like, you know, your religion, yeah, it's whatever, you know, but that kind of stuff, that's just for the housewives. You know, are you a housewife? Is that what you are? Are you a lady? Are you a girl? You know, do you wear a dress? Or do you want to hang out with the boys, you know, the real men? Because we believe this shit, you know what I mean? So if you really want to be in our club and you want to do business with us, you got to join this group. So it's like it creates this bond that supersedes nationality and religion and all these other identifiers, right? You know, the secret society supersedes all that. So that's a tremendous tool for corporate imperialism, isn't it? Right? Because you can just go overseas and you can just pick out like the best and the brightest and sign them up to your little silly little drinking club, and they're going to pull the strings for you. So, but by the same token, like religion, it's just like, well, what is it? To bind together. It's to give people like some sort of common purpose, right? So without that, they tried replacing theistic religion with atheistic religion. Fascism. Even though fascism was more friendly to organized religion because of the audience they were trying to appeal to, but it's still like your loyalty is to the state. You can go to church, but your loyalty is to the state. And then socialism and communism. Those are very, those are almost stereotypically religious systems. They're just non-theistic religious systems. And now this woke thing is Puritanism without the grace, like I said before. But the problem with the woke thing is that it's identity politics, and it's the ultimate atomizer. And we just see this over and over again now, where particularly so you had the gay flag, the rainbow flag, but now you've got to have the trans flag, and you've got to have like this flag and this flag, or you've got to have the asexual flag. So you just keep splitting the audience or splitting the community into ever smaller interest groups that almost inevitably become mutually hostile. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't know if there's going to be like, I don't think there's not going to be another revival. I don't think there's going to be another great awakening in this country. I really don't. At this point in time, I just don't think it's possible. I feel like the point we're at now reminds me very much what you read about the end of the state cult, the state paganism, the Jupiter cult. I think we're really at that point. You know what I mean? It's just that it's the talent. It's the inverse of that. I don't know what's gonna replace that, but something has to. Something has got to do that, because we're just going to fall apart. We really are. You can't have like an atomized society the way it's become and continue to exist. You just can't. It's never worked, and it doesn't work in microcosm, and it's not going to work now.
Yeah, I would agree. We probably should start ending it. Peanut, my dog I think she needs to go out. So I think somebody needs to get taken out for a walk in the snow. In the snow. But yeah, this has been a great conversation. Well, I guess to end, Chris, do you have any maybe good advice? I remember there was one interview we did. I think we were doing it on Our Heroes Wear Spandex, and I remember at the end, I said, "Do you want to end things?" And you said something like, "Look," and it inspired me. He said, "Look, getting to the end of the day is hard for anybody, anywhere in the world, at any time. Days are long, families work, but you said there's always spiritual help from above. There are forces that want us to succeed and will help us." I mean, I'm sure you feel that way too, right? I mean, I thought it's great advice, but I don't know if you have any other advice for people today to stay
I'm
sane.
gonna end this on an up note. But this is something that I can't really quantify or specify about. But I feel very strongly, and this is something that I've been experiencing directly for the past year or so, is that there are definitely there's something new out there. There's like this new presence out there. And this is going to sound very weird, and it is weird. Like, believe me, it's very weird getting out there and experiencing, but there's something out there. There's something in the atmosphere. Like, something has arrived. Like, I really believe that. Like, I almost had this like vision of it a couple weeks ago when I was driving to New York. Something is out there. I mean, there's something new. There's a new energy that's coming, that I haven't been able to define in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's a good thing. I think that there's like a new, for lack of a better word, I mean, a new spirit. I think there's a new spirit out there, and I think it's outside of us. I think it's beyond us. And I think it's something that we will eventually tap into. Again, I can't describe it, but I think it's in reaction, because I really believe, very strongly, that everything we're seeing with, the technocracy and the surveillance state. I mean, this is what happens at the end of a cycle. This is what happens at the end of an empire, for better, for better or worse. I mean, this is what happens when the ship is sinking. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So all this stuff that we're seeing, as negative as it is, and as discouraging as it can be, I think what I believe very strongly, and I hope to impart to other people, is that this is the end of it. This is the end of a cycle. I'm not saying that it's going to collapse without a fight or without collateral damage, so to speak. But I think we're at the end of the current power structures, the current arrangements are nearing their end, and I think it transcends politics and business and even religion, because I think that there's something welling up in reaction to this, into reaction to the globalism and the new world order and the technocracy and all these things. I wouldn't say this if I didn't really believe it. I really truly believe that there's something out there that I can't put my finger on, but I know it's there. It's just like I'm sensing it, like my antennae are vibrating. Again, I don't know what it is yet, but I just know it's there and it's powerful. And that might sound just completely useless to most people, but maybe if you get outside, especially at night, because I think that those energies are much more, like they sort of, they transmit better at night, like an AM radio transmits. We used to pick up AM radio signals from like Montreal at night around here. And, I think it's that kind of thing, maybe there's just less interference or something. There's less people using the network, so to speak. But no, I mean, I really do believe this. And I hope to be able to give people something to hold on to rather than just these sort of nebulous, meaningless speculations. But, I really do believe that very strongly. I think there's something out there. There's something new. There's a presence and an energy in the world that I think is going to have a profound impact on our lives in the days to come.
Awesome. I'm sure it's there for all of us, for the taking us seekers. And yeah, Vince, do you have any advice for people for 2021, or what's your thoughts on it?
Well, hang in there. Realize that almost your entire idea of what's going on out there is being fed to you electronically by people who are controlling and manipulating it. And you got to read between the lines. You got to read between the lines and watch for those who want to manipulate your mind. And if you tune into it, you can see it. And I agree with Chris. We're sending out signals of help. This cry for help. And hopefully help is on the way, and it's going to be a spiritual thing. So pay attention to spiritual things, although this isn't the kind of crowd that I need to really tell that to. And, we'll get through this. This too shall pass. This too shall pass.
Yeah. And like Chris said before, there are powers rooting for us right now from above, and they will help us out if we ask them. So
yeah, contact them if you can.
Well, awesome. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you very much for the audience, for your support, your super chats, your great questions, and just being here. Again, the audio will be out in a couple of days. I will have Chris's book on the show notes where you can get it, his website, and all that. But Chris, you want to tell the audience in an audio version where to find more about your work and your new book?
Yeah, just go to secretsun.blogspot.com and you'll be able to find anything you need.
Yeah, and definitely check it out. Get the book. Good book. Are you going to put more out? Because again, as I saw, there's no Lucifer Technologies or the Sybil and Buckley. All these other themes that are so intriguing.
Oh, you're not going to be able to shut me up, man. The cork is off the bottle, so just get ready.
That's a start. Yeah, you're just getting started. Good. We need
I'm
this
just
note.
getting started, man.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to have
What do you
these
think of me?
works and at your hands. You can just read them and awesome. Well, we look forward more to your work. And for the audience, Happy New Year. There's some great shows coming in 2021. Topics like We'll be talking about mystic Judaism, Jung's Black Book, working with angels. So really good topics coming in 2021. Great guests, and I hope you're here because, yeah, we need that gnosis more than ever. So first of all, Vance, thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, it's always fascinating. And Chris, really enjoyed you tonight. You're looking good, by the way. I think good things are happening for you. So, and thank you, Miguel. It's great to be here, and everybody out there in the chat. Thank you all. My apologies for not getting to you if I missed you.
It happens. Well, thanks for doing events. And Chris, as always, thanks for stopping by at the AB Live in the Virtual Alexandria, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Happy New Year. Happy new next apocalypse. And again, appreciate you are here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self here in the desert of the real. Good night, everyone. And hello and goodbye, as always, as I say.